we're going to present kind of the status of the development and some of the trends that today, not yesterday, today are happening in different ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems. So we see entrepreneurship, we can see in different ways, but the way that we see entrepreneurship today is at the intersection of three different areas. If we're missing one of these areas, the ecosystem that we're building is really not effective. It's kind of we're missing one leg. So thinking about startups in a vacuum that can grow big, that's kind of a misunderstanding of what building startups is all about. So we're going to go a quick deep dive into kind of some numbers about startups today. But then I think the focus, the more interesting pieces here, will be into what's happening at the corporate level and also at investors level. So we do believe that to create an healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem, we need to have these three ingredients, and not just these three ingredients, but ingredients that can actually work together in a pretty smooth way. And this is what is making Silicon Valley a very different place of, in the startup world across the planet. So, we're going to end the last 10 minutes. We're going to give you a few hints of why this is actually working pretty nicely in Silicon Valley. It's not just because the startups are smarter, because that's actually not the case, but it's because the other two pillars of the entrepreneurship world are actually very well oiled. Okay? So, all right. So that's the plan. Let's get started. I'm not sure if can I control from here? Okay. All right, so we're going to start talking about startups. The ingredients of a startup, that's the one thing that hasn't changed over the years. We still need the key points that you see here. We clearly need an idea, clearly need some planning and resources, and definitely we need the people that are able to bring an idea into a successful ventures. So the entrepreneur, at the end of the day, keeps being the core of the venture. Those are some statistics, just to give you a sense of the profile of entrepreneurs. And we made here a quick comparison between a report that a Kaufman Foundation published in 2012 and Alberto Onetti published in 2012. And so you can see some of the numbers here is pretty interesting to see that, in fact, most of the data are not much different from US versus Italy. In fact, the age distribution of you guys, of the startup people, is pretty similar. So the companies are started in the 20s. The kids is still kind of an exception, and it's definitely not the rule. Entrepreneurs are between 30 and 49 years old. Same in Italy, 84% of entrepreneurs, according to the survey that we launched as Mind the Bridge in 2012, are in the 26 to 45. Female entrepreneurs, that's actually still a big deal. There's not enough female entrepreneurs, and that's actually the same data across the world. Silicon Valley is not any different, as are most of the other countries. The education still, again, is pretty significant. So I'm not looking at kids that are just out of school or drop out are still the exception, is not the rule. In fact, 42% of you guys as startuppers have a significant degree, a master's degree or more. So a good number, in fact, 11% had a PhD and an MBA. And actually, if I remember correctly, it's not there, but also a good number of those had this PhD or MBA outside Italy. So this is actually another pretty interesting factor, that the cross-pollination between countries is central. Again, prior experience in US, Kaufman Foundation says that at least 57% of the startuppers are 6 or more years of experience, and in Italy is no difference. 80% has at least a significant 8 to 9 years of experience. Again, the average startupper is not a young newcomer. And bootstrapping, so the way that we do the funding and incubation period is still, for the vast majority, bootstrapping, that is, you put your own money. All right, so how does it start? This is no different. So clearly, a business starts with a business idea. With no idea, there is no business. But again, we tend to over-evaluate the topic of the idea, right? And this is typically where research kick in, where the projects are kind of a research spin-off. The big deal to bring success is what you see on the right-hand side. What really matters is not really the idea, but as you heard before, is all about execution. So how good the founders are into translating a business idea into a feasible business. This is the other ingredient that we mentioned, the business plan. Who wrote a business plan here? Can you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you are part of the past. Okay. You are part of the past. It is encouraging, but Amanda Bridge 2007, 2008, we started with a business plan competition, and it's actually 6 years ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. Here's a quote. This is Dave McClure, one of the relevant angel investors in Silicon Valley, but this is a pretty well accepted rule today. Nobody is reading your creative, financing projections seriously. So nobody today, I mean, the whole idea of business plan is way gone. That doesn't mean that we don't need planning, but the way that we tend to evaluate business are not through the 50, 60, 80 pages business plans. Today the norm, and we're going to talk about this in a second, but today the norm is kind of the written rules that this guy here, started putting into words not too long ago. Any idea it's written there? No, it's not written there. Any idea what that guy is? Nobody? The bearded one? Anybody? No? No? You guys know it. Come on, help me here. No, you don't know? Steve Blank, yes. You want a trip to Castel del Lobo. All right, yeah, this guy is Steve Blank. That is one of the founder of the whole Lean Startup methodology. How many of you have heard of Lean Startup methodology? Yeah, a lot of hands up. Okay, Steve Blank is your man. So this is the person that started the whole business today. There is a huge business around the whole Lean Startup methodology. And Steve Blank, together with Eric Ries, that was one of his students, is the one person, a university professor, that put this process into words and into a business that is a consulting business. But what Steve Blank says is that the definition of startup is the following: a startup is a company, a temporary company, looking for a business model. It's a temporary company looking for a business model. That's kind of the definition. And so, how that translates into planning, that's what the Lean Startup methodology is all about. So typically, this is kind of the current, so to speak, because it's been around for 5, 6 years, but is the current version of business planning. What is the big difference there? That rather than writing and developing your applications in a vacuum, so you stop everything, and for 2 years you invest a whole lot of money into developing what you think could be relevant in the market. And then 2 years into it, you realize that nobody wants your product, which is not uncommon. Okay? Rather than doing this cycle, the whole idea of a Lean Startup methodology is to develop your initial, very basic first version of the product together with the market. So get the market engaged from really day zero. Doesn't make sense to invest, to build a product and do a lot of functionalities and have a lot of line of codes, if that's software, if nobody's going to use it. And by the time I launch it in the market, that wave is already gone. It's already passed, okay? So that's something that actually has been happening for quite some time. I work for Google for almost 8 years. And Google is a great example of that methodology. So try to push the products as soon as possible in the market and have you users, test it and give feedback and then reiterate. That's how it works. Okay, so that's pretty much what is Lean Startup methodology is all about. So there is a vision, but a vision, has to be clear. Otherwise, it becomes an hallucination. So you think that something is happening, but it's not actually reality. So the only way to see if you're not hallucinating is actually to test it very early on in the market. So you do a vision, you steer it, and then once you are proved that your model is actually, your hypotheses are actually real, you start accelerating. So that's where you put money, you put resources, you build the business. So typically what you do, you test the product and you do what's called the customer development, which is different from the product development, meaning customer development, right? So you build the product together with what the customer said. So you assess the customer needs very early on, and then you either fail, but if you fail fast, okay? So in most of the accelerators today in Silicon Valley, there is actually a large sign. It's not very promising, but it says fail fast. Meaning that if you really have to fail, because you're gonna fail, 80 out of 100 companies at startup level typically fail. That's part of the whole economics of startup economy, yeah? So there is the expectation that you're gonna fail, but if you fail, you better fail fast. So don't make me waste $2 million, 2 years, the time of 6 people, the founders, and so on. Test it as early as possible, and so you figure that probably that's not a viable business. Hello? Yeah, it's back. I was having an hallucination. It wasn't a vision. Okay, so if you have to do it fast. The other keyword that you hear more and more is this one here. Any idea what that means? So pivoting, right? As you do when you play basketball. Yeah. So the idea is that you test your hypothesis with the market, but then you realize the hypothesis actually don't hold true. So what you do is that you switch, right? You pivot. Okay. And so after you do that, you can, it's a time to scale. This is another big, oops, didn't come there. I see from this computer, I don't see it there. All right. So there's another big saying there in this methodology that says, get out of the building. Meaning that you can't build your products in a vacuum. You cannot stay in your research centers, closed doors for years, developing, your idea, but in a vacuum. So get out of the building. And why do you need to get out of the building? To do this customer development that we mentioned before. So the typical situation today, if you go around San Francisco, it's actually pretty interesting because no matter where you go as a potential customer, users of an application, you see dozens of startups that will sit down with you, you're buying something, and they will ask you, can I ask you a couple of questions? And it happens all the time, right? This is the customer development. So the norm today, if you're building a product, is that you're doing it together with the customer right away. So you do surveys right away. If you're buying this coffee, how much do you like to pay, prior to go and having your line before you get your coffee, kind of a thing. Okay, so that's what is this cycle. So there are ideas that clearly still the core of the business model. Then you build what is called MVP. This is another buzzword that you hear more and more and more. It's the minimum viable product. So you build what you think is really the very minimum. The very minimum of a product to prove your hypothesis, right? So rather than, you have a vision of having 20 different features, and being big, sure, that's still a vision. But what you need to prove is really the core product. And you prove it, and you build with minimal resources. You build your product, and then you start measuring. That's the only thing that matters. So you do customer discovery. So who are my typical customer? and then you do customer validation. Customer validation is typically you actually knock doors and ask exactly potential customers, would you pay for this thing? Would you use it? And if you would use it, would you pay tomorrow this amount of money? So you go as real, as deep as possible, improving that your business hypotheses are true. So this is the key point, the measurement. You validate your learning. You get a lot of data. Again, this is looking at how we used to do stuff at Google. This is a typical situation. It's fully data-driven. And then you learn. Learn, that means that you need to make sense of the data. So what actually the customer are telling you, again, to avoid having your hallucination and try to really follow what the potential market is asking you to do, right? And so you go again and again. So this is a cycle. At this stage, you have learned, at least the first time, and so you decide, is that time to, am I right on? Am I right on target? Or does it make sense to pivot, to change something, right? But rather than expecting and waiting for 2 years, you do as early as possible. And then you go back to the drawing board. You go back to ideas and you reassess this cycle, okay? So this is typically the very basic of the lean startup methodology that today works for startups. But the most interesting thing is that today, this is kind of the same methodology that the more innovative large companies are using to test their products. So there is a whole business, by the way, of teaching how the large corporations, the 10,000, the 20,000, the 30,000 people, companies, can actually use this methodology within their development cycle and the product development cycle. All right, so this is just to give you a sense of what's happening in the startup world. Now, let's go to talk about the other bubble, or the other leg of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I'm going to call Alberto and start talking about what's happening in the investment world.
Thank you, Marco. So the second bullet or balloon of our story is the investor piece. As we said, entrepreneurship is an ecosystem, and in order to feed the ecosystem, you need all the ingredients. And the investors are the second most important ingredient. So let's spend a few minutes talking about that. You see what are the real kings. Because if you are venture capital firms, you get continually evaluated about the result that you're getting. And if you invest a lot of money and you're not able to produce large exit, your credibility goes down and the coolest startup does not want to get funded by you. While, if you are a good investors are able to produce the biggest exit, typically all the startups want to come to you. And so what are the biggest names? The first one is Sequoia. They are in the 22 of the top 100 exit in the US. Not bad. And there is another one, is called NEA, New Enterprise Associate. It's 13, and Hassel is 13. And they are, just to get you familiar with these names. And keep in mind, it's not just important to be there when you are smiling, taking the pictures at the day of the exit, right? This is important. Because just if you arrive at the finish line, that is the exit, you are the real winner. But it's also important that you invested early, when the company was really small, and not invested the day before the exit, because your return will be measured by that. And so what are the real kings? The real kings are the ones that are behind the biggest exit, one, but also the ones that will be able to invest into these startups in the early stage. So in these statistics, you find the company that were able to invest, the percentage invested before the Series B. So seed, Series A, Series B. And you see again, the names are the usual ones. Sequoia, 64% of the investment that are reaching the exit have been invested before the B. NEA, 62, Benchmark, 89, Norwest Venture Partners, 78, just to give you an idea how to evaluate also your investors. Okay, so this was the quick wrap up about just so generic overview about the investment world. Now move to the full balloon, that is the corporates. Good question is, what are the corporate about? Why corporate and startups? This is a pretty good question. I think on this question, we are our friend of Factory Berlin here. I think we're betting a lot. And we're betting a lot because we are real believers that all the startups movement that is igniting all over Europe, all over Italy, really is risking to go nowhere. So we start talking about startups, we're no longer working about existing companies. The problem is that the startups are contributing in the US to the 3% of the overall employment, 3%. And in Italy, probably of the 0.000 something percent of the overall employment. So we cannot think about startups as a separate world from the existing world. And we need to find a way to bridge the two worlds. Why this is important? Asma will walk you through that. First of all, if you look at what is happening out there, you look that also the most strongest industry are slowly being disrupted by something that is new, that is not coming from competitor, but is coming from outside. Now, in Naples you can, but if in other cities, if you are going to call a cab, most of the time you're not just calling a cab, you're not waving your hand, you are pushing a button on your app, contacting Uber, and you will pick up by another car. Why? Because it's more efficient, cheaper, and the service is probably better. Okay? If you're now booking a hotel, you're probably not calling the Royal Continental Hotel, sorry guys, but you have also the opportunity to book an apartment close by using something that's called Airbnb, right? If you're putting, you need to find a job. You find people, some people, you need to find a job, you need to place your announcement for looking for a job. Probably you're not looking, you're no longer putting your announcement in a paper newspaper, but you are entering through something that's called Craigslist. I can do plenty of examples. I'm not saying that what is existing is no longer important. I'm saying that there are new competitors coming from nowhere that are changing the rules of the games. The good thing is that they are bringing competition, they're bringing new opportunity, they're bringing alternative solution that could be cheaper, better, faster, nicer, or not. But they're bringing, so for us as a customer, they are enlarging our opportunities. But if you are a corporate, and you are the incumbent, or you are the dominant leader of a sector, you need to consider that you cannot say, okay, I'm the leader, I'm going to be the leader for the next 20 years, just because I'm sitting here. Because the only certainty you have by sitting in a leading position, and that sooner or later you will lose your position. This is a given. And so you need to think how to, this is a good example, by the way. You heard about a company called Kodak? They were fighting another company called Polaroid, remember? So Polaroid, they invented the digital photography, just did use the wrong technology, right? Remember that you push and then you get your picture and then you, remember that? Done. And Kodak, they move, they understood the digital revolution, but they were too slow. Because one of the problems, the large corporates are slow to react, are slow to embrace innovation, are slow to deliver innovation. Also if they see it. Most of them do not, but also if they see it, most of the time they are too slow. And, sorry. So you, large organization, most most people say that are called graveyards of innovation. Because also if they have the ingredients internally to develop innovation, they are too slow to understand, too slow to react, too slow to implement, because they are complicated, because they are large, they are complicated, they are process. Why not? Because in the corporate, you're supposed to follow process, and you're supposed to deliver things that works perfectly. But sorry, no new things are supposed to burn perfectly done, like a Athena from the head of Zeus, right? Nothing is newly born is perfect. So you need to understand that in order to deliver something that is radical disruptive, something that is radical innovative, you need to make experimentation, you need to test, you need to accept failure. There is a really nice book that I really suggest everybody to read it. It's called The Hard Things About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. It's really, really nice reading. And it tells one simple concept that says, you know, the innovative company are the companies that can tolerate failure, tolerate and incentive failure. Some large corporates are introducing what are called the failure matrix. If you are not failing often, I will not give you a bonus because you are not risking enough. And you see, most of the time, you take the conservative way because innovating, there is some risk that you do something wrong. And that is perfectly normal. Startups do all the times wrong things because they learn through wrong things. Most of them die. And it's perfectly normal because the excellence, the innovation comes out for this. And so, what we are trying to do is also to adopt the approach, the lean approach that Marco explained to you earlier, into the large organization. Meaning that the best ways to cope with the adversity to risk that is typical of large organization is to introduce wave of innovation that can cope with failure. But they are able to fail fast and cheap and learn quickly about from the intermediate results that they are getting. And so the lean approach applied to corporates is the right thing to be done, because the way you can probably deal with the required of perfection of large organization, and on the other time the urgency of trying and failing that is typical of new things, okay? So most of the time in the organization, there is plenty of innovators that just not have hearing at the top level. And so you need to find a way to keep them work and give them wings and to make them work to produce innovation for your organization. This is step number one. And step number two, and the final one, is to embrace the startup world. So we cannot consider startups as a totally separate world from the corporates. We need to bridge these two worlds, because the Davids that are all around probably are not the one that's supposed to kill Goliath, but to help him to continue to live and to grow. That's the way it's supposed. And tomorrow we will have the first European event of Startup Europe Partnership. This is all about this, trying to create a matching platform between large corporates and startups, because the startups are the fast track to innovation for most of the corporates. So Marco, I'm almost done here.
You're not almost done, you're done. Okay, so let's go quick to the conclusions. We're going to talk about what's happening in Silicon Valley. Not just because Silicon Valley is a cool place, but also because it gives us the opportunity of what's happening, in the future. So the good thing about Silicon Valley when it comes to innovation is that it gives us a good projection of what is going to happen in other ecosystems. So it's actually a good proxy to see what potentially might happen also here in Germany, in France, and whatnot. Okay, so we're going to get a real quick tour of some of the trends what's shaking into in Silicon Valley. So we put just 7. That could be more, but those are the ones that we think are relevant, especially in this context. So the things that we are discussing, and especially for what might happen here in the local community as well. All right, so we talked about at length, talked about lean startup movement, the fact that today is actually much easier to find and to start a startup, especially because it's much cheaper. You don't have to spend $5 million, $2 million to build a product, as it used to be 5, 7, 10 years ago. Today it's mostly in the cloud. Today, the Amazon, the Googles, you name it, are fighting to drive the price of building and hosting your products pretty much down to 0. So the hosting of the services, of the machine power and all that is actually going dramatically down. So clearly the whole concept of lean is not just, as we mentioned before, for the startups, but it is across the board, including for investors. So today you need much less money to put it into a company to understand whether or not this company might have an option. So one of the things that is happening is essentially that the players also in investment side are changing. Kind of the old venture capital that we described before has to reinvent their added value. And in fact, the value of the value chain of the investment, of the filtering of the best ideas is moving much earlier. So kind of the traditional venture capitalists that you might have read about potentially are also the companies that are being disrupted today in Silicon Valley. This is I think a trend that is happening everywhere. So there is so much excitement about accelerators and incubators, right? Because you see it's all going up and to the right. The number of startups that are getting produced by these factories of startups, right? I mean, the main question is: are we over? Is there an overproduction? I would argue yes, there is an overproduction. We're actually producing too many plus ones. Too many companies are doing exactly the same thing. So there is a risk that the amount of entities that we're producing, that we're pouring maybe $10,000, $20,000 are actually too many. So is there a bubble? This is the one thing, and the big question that I think is very relevant for Silicon Valley, but for Italy as well, for Campania region as well. Is there a bubble of accelerators, right? And we keep it as a question mark, right? I mean, we need to maintain a balance where the expectations that we have out of accelerators or incubators can be matched. And the expectations are that we're actually producing value, meaning that we are producing companies that can last for a long time. Or otherwise, the main potential issues would be we're just telling people to spend 2, 3, 4 years in a nice place that is overlooking, a nice bay, but then eventually it's not bringing value. So 3 years from now, they'll be out in the market and looking for a job, okay? So that's a kind of the potential danger of overproducing, accelerators in general that potentially don't bring, the value over the long term. And one of the technicality of that, and this is actually a pretty heavy slide, but the only kind of a message that I want to give you is that today is still kind of very simple to find some seed money, the 20, the 30, the 50, the 100K, but it's still as hard as before, it's not more, to actually raise more funding. The Series A that Alberto was talking about. What does that mean? That is a whole lot of companies here. You can actually see it's pretty direct, but there is a bloodbath. The fact there's a lot of companies that are getting started, getting incubated, getting accelerated, but then they cannot go over, the bottom of the, the next level of funding. So they run out of cash, right? And so the overproduction of companies in the first place is then producing this gap between a lot of production, but then the company that are going to the next level is pretty much the same. Kind of related to that is that there is potentially also, I mean, there's been a lot of production of startups and incubators and accelerators. And with that comes the excitement also of the investment side. So, wealthy individuals are actually getting excited about the potential of investing in startups. So, the angels, whose definition Alberto just described, are, growing as much as the startups. So the kind of the tendency, the trends of overproducing of startups is actually also producing a lot of new potential early stage investors, the angel investors, so kind of the individual that is investing in startups. So this has two causes. One is that the cost of investing today is actually lower. So I can actually put $10,000, $20,000 because for the lean methodology, that gives me enough bandwidth to understand whether this company might go into the future. And the other trend is that there are so many of these companies that I might as well, what they say in English is spray and pray. So you put a lot of different chips and then you hope that something will stick. Spray and pray. All right, but that's still kind of the funnel is getting bigger at the angel level, and a whole lot of companies today, they don't go over the early stage investment, which is eventually the macroeconomical data that we should have a look at. All right, so this is the number 6 of the the trends that we think are relevant. Again, kind of related to the disruption of the investment cycle. You'll heard about crowdfunding, yes? Yes, no? Yes? Vast majority, yes. The new trend is actually equity crowdfunding, meaning that companies can start selling, stocks and equity pieces of their entity, a very early stage, before being floated into the public market, at a very small little pieces. So there are entities and platforms like AngelList. There's actually a whole lot. It is not just in US. Italy, on that front, is actually getting pretty excited. There is one, but there will be more because the regulation are changing. That's actually, we just held a conference in Milan a few months ago where, we talked about the technicalities of how this is, world is being disrupted. What is this causing? Number one, there is disintermediation. So, you don't have to talk to, the professional investors anymore because you can follow, whatever the coolest investor is doing. Right? You can follow the kind of investments that they're doing, and if you want, you can invest alongside. Not necessarily, $1 million. You can invest as little as the company accepts. Okay, so this is a huge deal, as well as transparency. So now I can see in a platform like this, who's investing in where. Because I know exactly their deal flow. I know exactly the companies that are raising money, and it's kind of a much more transparent than it used to be. And so with activities like the syndication means that there is a pool of investors that are eventually investing in one company. All you need is just one professional angel, and then this professional angel is collecting money from me, from you, from him, and is eventually the lead investor without being structured, as a professional investor, but still can invest the amount of money that is historically was the more mature investment of VCs. Okay. All right, I'll leave you with the last one of the trends. That is about acqui-hiring. Who knows what is acqui-hiring? No? Francisco, you know it. I know you know it. You do it all the time, huh? All right, acqui-hiring is a mix of two words and two trends. One is that the companies are starting acquiring other small companies, not necessarily for the product. They're acquiring small companies because they like the team. Rather than investing, millions in forming a team and training a team into something, they just get a package. It's 3, 4, 5 team at a time. 5 people at a time. But still, the cost of acquiring that group of people is much less and is much quicker than building within Google, within Facebook, within Twitter, those competencies. Again, it's part of the trend that is happening in Silicon Valley. That is, there is a talent war. So the good companies are fighting big time for the best talent. And so one way to do it is acquiring their companies. They use part of the product, most of it they probably put on the side, but the main core is the acquiring because of this team. And those are, you know, I mean, for European standards actually can be significant transactions, right? It can be the 20, 30, 40 million dollars. You know, acquiring 4 people for $40 million, still kind of consider acqui-hiring to some extent. It's not, you know, the $20,000, right? And this is just a list of some of the acquisition that happens. What the message here is that the market of startups, of investors, of the whole idea of building startups makes sense just if you have an option to have an exit. Just if you have an option to return the money to the initial investors. So if you don't have a market where, you know, these options are open, doesn't really make a lot of sense to have a lot of startups around. Okay? There is no economical sense to it. And this is just a trend of some of the companies acquiring people. I mean, when I was at Google, the last year at Google, they acquired 140 companies. 140 companies. You probably read on a newspaper, you know, 10, 12, because a whole lot of them are small little acquisitions, but it's still fueling the whole market of angel investors. Because the return maybe is little, somehow little, but still significant. It's still the reason why I'm still in the game. All right, so those are some statistics. I'm going to go real quick. This is more of a game that we played when we were looking at numbers, but this is, you know, Twitter acquisition strategies. That was even before going public. They used the vast majority of their investment, from the market, to acquire small little companies. So even a company that was pre-IPO was using, you know, the vast majority of the funding into acquiring companies with 2, 3 people. Where are these companies located? Guess what? They're next door to the headquarters of the company. You go around Google in Mountain View, you see the whole plethora of startups that they are sitting there and waiting and praying, because that happens. You know, there is a whole, you know, proximity is still the main reason why people eventually do acqui-hires. So the clusters are still, even in the digital world, are still, you know, one of the main reason why eventually you pick a company versus another one that is maybe better, but is 10,000 miles away. And the same thing happens. This is a video from Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg that is actually describing that the whole strategy of a Facebook is we never think about acquiring, you know, company per se. We're acquiring talent. That's what we do. That's how we grow our entity. What of you has heard of this company, Glancy? Nobody? Nobody? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, this is a typical example. Glancy, company run and started by an Italian guy that was actually an intern at Google in 2 years before. Totally passionate about this product. You know, eventually, you know, with the lean startup methodology, was trying to get into the market. Didn't have a lot of success up until the moment, 2 years into it, where they posted, you know, on TechCrunch. It was part of the discussion, and from this discussion, the whole hype of the company started picking up. And then eventually, it was the last acquisition from Facebook before they went public. Typically, acqui-hire, right? The product was very early stage. In fact, the product is being integrated a month ago into Facebook, 2 years after the acquisition, kind of the core of that product. The reason why they acquired them is because they wanted to have 3 people. They actually had a good sense of what the heck, you know, those functionalities were all about. So it was an acquisition for the talent. All right, so we're at the end. I think we're a good average 15 minutes late, which is good. Those are the conclusions that I want to leave you with. And then we'll have time to discuss more some of the trends. But those are the 3 main conclusions that we want to leave you. Number 1, when we talk about startups, we cannot look at them in a vacuum. The sense of startups is if we are able to build an ecosystem where, you know, the production of this new technology bring results eventually, bring returns, bring economical value, okay? So it's too easy to think about the very short term, you know, to feel local accelerators and to, to give a temporary, option for people that are, that are innovative. We need to create the conditions for these companies to grow. We need to create the conditions. So think about the long term, think about the potential, connections with the other two pieces that we mentioned. So we need smart money, not just money. We need smart money, meaning that people that can actually help into the development of the next phase. But we also need a strong connections with a real, economical worlds of more mature companies that are the reason why eventually startups, become bigger. And the third part is we need a lot of education. And again, this is probably, self-promotion, what we do at Mind the Bridge, but we strongly believe that to bring entrepreneurial ecosystem to the next level, we need to learn the technicalities. We need to learn what does that mean to invest in convertible notes. We need to know how to pitch, how to package your stuff for the investors. We need to know as a company how to deal with startups, how to potentially evaluate startups, what kind of contract you need to have. So without that, it's kind of very hard then to be effective. And, there are places where we can learn from, all right? And so with that, I'll leave you to the next panel. In fact, this is all about learning. So what is next is a set of a presentation of different accelerators, the models that are working for them. So we asked them to present the economics, so kind of the plan of the accelerator, but also, some learnings. So, what worked, what maybe didn't work, how did they do any pivoting along the way, so that we can actually share this data with you. All right? So thank you very much, and we go next to